Happy Monday. And to all of you out there, welcome to this second episode conversation of the True Nature Immersion series. I'm Gage,
And
and
I'm Will.
today we would like to start by addressing a question that came up from a listener to last week's conversation, which was, why is this interesting? Why are we interested in exploring these kind of true nature inquiries? And why would it be beneficial to others to do the same sort of exploration?
Yeah, I'm first of all, I just want to say thank you to anyone who listened to our first episode. And yeah, it's been really fun and valuable to hear people's responses, hear what people liked or wanted more of. And it's just a fun adventure for me exploring like how to have these conversations that are valuable for other people and open things up. And I think that's the perfect place to start. Like, why do this? Why listen to a conversation called True Nature Immersion? And why explore our true nature? And the first thing that comes up for me in that question um, really takes me back to an experience in college where I was pretty anxious, maybe depressed, just not really satisfied with life. Like you know, there was nothing necessarily bad. I was happy. Like I
You,
was
you,
striving.
you froze at bad.
Ah, um, yeah, there wasn't necessarily anything bad happening in my life. I just wasn't very happy. And then I had an experience while listening to The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, driving myself home from LSU to Georgia, where like, I don't know if the mind just shut up for a second or what exactly happened, but I had like a real sense of joy. And I like even laughed a little bit and thought I might be going crazy. And after that, I I was just like, I want more of that, and I want everyone to taste that. To me, that is like happiness, joy, the a break in anxiety. And I didn't even realize how anxious I was until I had that experience. Um, and that's really the why for me, because I think when we really connect with our deeper selves, with our true nature, there's like a whole nother ocean of joy that's available to us. And ultimately, that feels really good to me. Living from that space is a more sustainable way individually and collectively for us to live. And for that reason, I'm just really curious in my own true nature, how to open up to that, connect with that. And I feel like a part of my purpose is to create spaces and conversations for other people to explore in a similar manner.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of my why. And I'd also like to kind of speak to, why should a listener be interested? Why should someone listen? But I'll let you bounce off what I just said.
Okay, so my why for this, it has a couple of different layers. I have a why on like an individual personal level on and on a more collective kind of community implications level for why these conversations are interesting and exciting to me. Um, so had a similar sort of experience my, I guess, sophomore year of high school, um, where I was very depressed, liked to present myself as being happy all the time because I wanted to be, but like really wasn't, and had some rough times with like crazy recurring dreams and all those kind of things that were just like really getting to me for a while. And then I had some moment of clarity where I recognized like, wait, I get to pick how my mind works. Like I'm not a victim to this thing. I can choose how I look at the world, and that changes my entire experience. And then I was absolutely hooked from that point forward, um, on like every aspect of self-development things, from just like learning how to do crazy physical feats to learning any kind of information or instruments, or just like cultivating my being. And I hadn't really come into contact with any of the practices that I'm familiar with now. Um, so fast forward a couple of years later, I found the book Be Here Now by Ram Dass, and it like catapulted all of my interest in exploring the nature of who I am as an avenue of self-development. Um, and then has just expanded drastically from there. And so for me, what makes that interesting is that I came from a place of being like very down, not really having any kind of direction or strong interest in a lot of things, to a place where I feel like vibrant and like I'm capable of fully engaging with the world and not getting caught up in all of like the petty weird things that used to agitate me. Um, and then on a more collective level, like being able to, like you had mentioned, invite people into that space where they can feel that like, wow, I can actually, there is a different way to live where I don't have to be upset, or I don't have to use the kind of Hindu-Buddhist word suffering. I don't have to suffer my way through life. I don't have to just like put my head down and trudge through the mud. I can just like enjoy myself. I can enjoy life in a way that is, like you said, sustainable for myself and others, won't burn me out, won't cause me to act in ways that are harmful to the people around me or the environment. And that brings me to the like community implications, like having a group of people together living in the same place or in multiple different places, who all have like an internal source of joy and personal empowerment, and again, like vibrancy, exuberance in their being, the kind of ecstaticness that comes from having internal joy and knowing that that can't really be taken from you. Like the way that our societies would work, whether it's how companies worked in coordination with in nature and the environment and all of those things, or just how people got along with each other or communicated with each other, or dealt with differences, or any of those things, would, I think, just be drastically different if the majority of the people inside of the community felt a sense of like personal responsibility for the way that they see the world, the way that they interact, all of those things.
Yeah, 100%. That all resonates with me, and there's so much in there I want to explore. Um, and yeah, the first thing, like, I want to speak to is like the individual listening to this. So whether, you know, you're a friend of ours, or someone told you about this conversation, or you just happened across it on the internet, I think each individual human or soul is on some sort of journey. And in our journey, there seems to be, like, in each individual journey, there seems to be like parallels, and each one is entirely unique, but I've noticed that it seems like there are these, momentary shifts that people experience, like openings. And especially right now, I think there's a lot of good reason to be suffering. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world that can be challenging, and I know a lot of people might feel very alone right now.
Mhm.
um, and if your happiness depends on the stability of the external world, which I know mine did and still does at times, it's a really hard time to find happiness. And so what we're speaking to is another source, and I might even assert like a more sustainable, a real source of happiness and joy, which is um, there's another possibility inside of us. Did I cut out for a second?
Yeah, you cut out which is
Um, yeah, I just am suggesting that on each individual journey, a there seems to be these, wake up moments where we realize, like, like you said, oh wait, I'm not just sort of stuck in this way and a victim of whatever life throws at me. And my happiness doesn't necessarily just depend on my bank account or the stock market or the,
Mhm.
whoever got elected president. I can actually choose to be happy. I can actually choose how I want to show up and how I want to wake up in the morning. Now, that can be challenging at first when we like first realize this, because we have so many patterns and habits that
Mm.
we've been conditioned to form and since early childhood. Um, but ultimately, what we're speaking to, or this conversation, can serve as the conduit to tapping into that inner joy. And each individual has a different background that they're coming to this conversation with, and different things might resonate with different people. But ultimately, yeah, I'm just here in this conversation, um, attempting to model what is possible in terms of like joy, real internal joy. And I'm not saying like I'm totally there, but I do see so much is possible for each individual, and then collectively, if we can all plug into our own source of inner peace from that space, like suddenly all the like, ego dramas that absorb a lot of our energy, time, money, resources, can be channeled into like, how can we just create a society and a planet and a family and an individual that's like really awesome and works for every. Think, we don't even know what's possible.
So I know we've used the word joy several times so far in this conversation, and I would like to hear from you, like what it is, what you think joy is. what does that even mean to you? Because I would imagine that whoever is listening to this, everybody has a different kind of connotation of what joy looks like.
Yeah, great question. And it, in these conversation, language also often falls short. For me, I often, you know, these experiences of joy, like joy doesn't even really touch that feeling, but it's
Mm,
like the most, I think, the best word I found to use to like point to an internal experience. So for me, joy is just an experience, a feeling of like, it's kind of to me like a more grounded happiness.
mm,
And um, just like a feeling of being like light and tingly and like not worried, and just sort of like I'm alive. It feels good to be alive. The sun is shining or the rain is falling and I'm here.
mm.
Um, yeah, what about you? What do you hear in the word joy?
So I used to think of joy as um, almost like a manic sort of happiness, where it was just like absolutely ecstatic about something. Um, but over time and more recently, I've started feeling joy as just like a very peaceful sort of enjoyment of being. It's like a which to me comes across as an invigorated feeling, like you had mentioned of like I'm alive, I'm here, this is like being in a body. Though I recognize my privilege in like having a fully functional body that can do all of the things that I want it to do in the place that I'm in, um, makes it, I would imagine, in some cases easier to fully release into that like this is awesome feeling, rather than like someone who may live in a place that's war torn or something like that may not feel as hyped about being a human in their environment. Um, but that also, like, joy to me comes largely in the sense of like not even like my body comes up in a space of gratitude, but joy itself feels like it happens behind my body, where it's just like a sitting into the spaciousness that's afforded by like not being reliant on my body and mind to give happiness, I guess, even though being embodied is a way to experience those things.
Mm. Yeah, I sort of feel similarly that joy is really like a space or a something that's inherent to our being, and it's not necessarily something to achieve or to like, grab onto or to find, like to go out in the world and
Mm,
find, but it's something that's always there underlying, a lot of the movements of the mind and body. And so for me, it's like when the mind can slow down and our awareness can kind of relax, drop out of the mind into the body, and even like, the body can be relaxed, then um, we start to tap into that space that's there. And to me, that's when joy arises.
mm.
Um, and I would like to touch on like the privilege that uh, we seem to have, both like, the privilege of an able body and a relatively like comfortable external situation. And I'm wondering if like this joy, is it something only available to the privileged,
Mm.
upper middle class white males? And are we like, do we need to check our privilege in this conversation?
Short answer to that in my brain is no. um, I do see the benefit to acknowledging privilege specifically in the context of societal relations. In the context of internally derived joy, I don't think it matters what color, gender, really anything that you are. It's just, like you said, like an inherent part of being that exists in every circumstance. Like I forgot the name of the movie, but there was a sort of documentary made a while ago. Happy something. I don't know if it was Happy People or something like that, but it was a group of people who lived in a tribe up in like way northern Siberia. And they were just like, seemed to be just hyped all the time that they hadn't died yet. Because it's like the conditions there are horrific. It's like it out of all of the places in the world that someone would probably not want to ever choose to live, that would be the one. It's just like obscenely, bitterly cold all the time. Um, there are, wolves and all of those things around. There's not a whole lot of just abundant food sources, but all of the people that this show depicted were like absolutely hyped just to be around each other, to be in the company of other people, and to be alive in that area. Um, I would love to hear your thoughts on the idea of joy being a sort of class-based privilege.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know the answer to that question. Um,
Mm,
I only know my direct experience,
mm,
and I do happen to fall into like the class which is considered privilege. And I am very privileged, and I'm thankful for my privilege, um, in terms of like, society structures.
mm,
Uh, and with that, there's a lot of attention and a big conversation happening in the world around privilege right now, at least in my circles.
mm,
And I think it can be confusing and challenging, like, and sometimes guilt arises for those of us who are privileged. Um, and like I feel a little bit of that. And so I want to be careful in exploring these things and not stepping over the fact that,
mm.
my I've been well taken care of my whole life thus far. Um, but I don't want to be too careful. Uh, and I do kind of feel similarly to you that, while I can understand, like, if you're really struggling to get food on the table and stay warm, um, there may not be the as much freed up energy to explore these more esoteric conversations. and at the same time, I don't think that means joy is not like a possibility. Like
Mm,
I think I sort of feel like anybody has direct access to joy and internal freedom and peace, even if they are in really challenging external circumstances. Um, and like, sometimes to me, it seems like the people who are, not privileged seem happier, like seem just more joyful
mm,
uh, than some of the most privileged people. Like, Jim Carrey says, I wish everyone could get rich and famous so they could realize it's not all about getting rich and famous.
mm,
And so I don't think this conversation is entirely, one of of I mean, maybe the freedom to have this conversation, the time to have this conversation is a privilege, but
mm,
ultimately what we're speaking to, the joy that exists within all of us, is not just reserved for the privileged. Even the ones who are in really challenging external circumstances, I believe, have direct access to this space of joy that we're speaking to.
mm.
um, yeah, it's like, this is not exclusive to anyone.
And I think I like that you mentioned being careful, but not too careful, because I think that it is important to acknowledge all of the the things inside of what I generally think of as like our karmic predicament, just like wherever we're placed in this world, whatever spacesuit we get whenever we come here, and all of the things that are related to that in the context of our communities and cultures and the interactions of the world, while also not being so cautious that it covers up the potential benefit that you could have to the world by just like, I don't know, being overwhelmed by the current cultural context.
Yeah, I think, if you are someone who is privileged and and worried about that privilege, like perhaps that worry isn't serving you, and you can be of greater service to the world by fully expressing yourself. And I do think, some of those worries, some of that guilt can get in the way of my full potential, which can then
Mm.
um, be of greater service to humanity as a whole. um, yeah.
And so along those lines, since we're talking about like the the potential of privilege or anything else to kind of obscure joy or the experience of joy, what is it that you think is the source or the kind of fundamental thing that obscures the experience of joy or makes that experience unaccessible, not necessarily generally, but on like a moment to moment basis?
Yeah, I mean, that to me is a big question. Like, what is it that is at the source of all of that clouds our joy, that blocks us from our true nature, um, which to me, yeah, is joy, peace, love, freedom, light. Like, what is it that blocks us from that? Um, and I think it shows up for me as a lot of mind activity. So like,
Mm,
worries, anxieties, like, oh, I gotta go do this, and I gotta make sure I do this, and like, oh, maybe I said this thing to this person, and there's just like a lot of chatter going
mm,
on in here, and then sometimes that might manifest in my body, like with like some tension, even pain, uh, just like an inability to really be here and now and to be present. And so those worries, or just those endless train of thinking about like what I need to do, um, different responsibilities or plans, which can be useful in some regards. I think a lot of them though are stemming from fear, and
mm.
we've talked about this. Um, but to me, like, it ultimately boils down to like, it's like fear is, I guess, the root, and there's all these different branches that stem from that root of fear, worry, anxiety, like, maybe past, like just past based concerns or reflections, um, guilt. It all seems to kind of tie into fear. What's your take on all of that?
I think that fear is definitely a stomping ground for the obscuration of joy. In hearing what you put out initially, the thing that came to mind was the first two verses or sutras in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali that in Sanskrit are Atta Yoga Nushasanam and Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which just translates to yoga is exposed now, and yoga is attained through the cessation of mind stuff or the stopping of the modifications of the mind. Um, so, like, the way that I interpret that is that the unification of being or yoga to yoke things together um, is experienced right now whenever you stop throwing all of your mind things out into the world. Um, and so that is what came to mind as soon as you started talking about mind chatter. But the question that really stood out to me in that is like, okay, if fear is the obscuration of joy, then what is the root of fear? Where does that come from? If our natural state of being, if it is inherent in our existence to feel joy, to feel that like blissful true nature, then why is fear there? Where does it come from?
And do you have an answer for that,
Um,
or a suspicion maybe?
so it seems to me like, and I feel like this question of like where does that come from could go all the way down. But to me, the fear stems inside of a perceived threat. Um, Threat to what? And it's the threat to whatever we are identifying with in a given moment. If that's like our bodily safety, if we like see our body as the entirety of our being and something is threatening the well-being of our body, then that causes fear. Um, if we have some idea about ourselves that we've conjured up in something, whether we did something embarrassing or uh, someone spoke about us a certain way and it conflicts with the way that we think about ourselves, then that causes a threat to our psychological identity. So it's just that perceived threat to our mentally created identification of existence, I think, is the thing that feeds fear.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on this in a different way in our last conversation around like,
Mm,
you know, if we, let's just say we come into the world in this relatively like blank and open space of just like, again, I sort of sense this in infants. There's just like this, they seem to be at ease and kind of in awe of everything. And like
mm,
their eyes are just like, just looking at everything. And then if, if they're hungry, they might just like start weeping and bawling and yelling and screaming. And then like, they get milk and suddenly it's like they're at peace again. And there's just nothing that they're holding on to, nothing that's taking them out of presence.
mm,
Um, and so to me, it seems like, yes, somewhere along the journey of growing up, some threats come in or some experiences happen, and there's a like mental physiological reaction that's like, oh no, this place is dangerous, like I got to be careful, I got to watch out for that. And I think we can look to like evolutionary biology and see that those sort of reactions are very effective in keeping us from getting eaten,
mm,
and protecting us and keeping the physical body alive so that it can go on and reproduce and survive.
mm,
So to me, like fear is a very useful um, thing in terms of survival, and there's a reason why it exists evolutionarily. Um, and we're at a new space in terms of evolution where there, for most people again who are
mm,
enjoy some degree of privilege, like there's really not that much that's going to take us out like in our day-to-day lives.
mm,
And yet that fear doesn't seem to just go away once there's no more lions to attack us. Like it stays there and finds new threats or
mm,
perceived threats. Um, and to go back to like your question of like what does that fear rest on? Like I do, and I think I heard this from some mystic in some reading, that like there's one pin that you know, our whole suffering, I guess, like rests on, all our fears, all our
mm,
worries, all our anxieties. Like if there's one pin, and if you pull that pin, then it all just kind of washes away. And
mm,
that pin is identity. And kind of what you were touching on, like fear is ultimately, I think, like, yeah, the fear of a threat to some self, like some identification. And to me, like you said, there's like different selves that we take on, one being like the body. If there's something, like maybe if I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, like the threat is the body falling off the cliff and the body dying, and fear comes in.
mm,
um or if someone has a gun to my head, like it's a threat to this body, and fear will arise. And that's like very straightforward. um and again, most of the time, like our physical bodies are not in, like, there's most of the time, for most of us, there's not a physical threat to our body. And so then like other selves that I think fear sort of arise from are like the identification or the self of my like things, my possessions, my house. We tend to usually subconsciously, I think, like identify with the things we own. And so like if you know, there's a flood, like it might be a threat to my house, or a big storm, and that causes fear. Or if like my bank account's getting low and I've got a mortgage payment, like that could be a source of fear, losing like my house. And then there's also like this status, like social status that we tend to identify with. And I think that's where like the fears of like, what is this person thinking of me? Or what if I don't have enough money to fit into this group? Or, our like social status selves. I think a lot of fear stems from that identification. And of course, it's different for each person, and each individual chooses to identify with different things. But ultimately, I do think all of fear stems from our identities. And I think, in politics is a great example of like, we identify with our political party, and if our political party is in danger, or there's a threat to that, then it might, anxiety might stem from that.
And so if that's what fear rests on, then how do you alleviate fear without suppressing it?
Yeah, another huge question. To me, it comes down to really looking at it, like putting it under the light of our awareness, and exploring like, what is this fear? Like, what's this all about? And just looking at where it shows up in the body or the mind, and perhaps what is the identity, what is the self that feels like it's being threatened. And for me, when I look at that, oftentimes that just like dissolves it. And it's like, wait, this, like, where is this, self of status? And when I look at it, it's like, there's nothing tangible there to hold on to, or to locate. And it seems to like soften this false expectation that if my bank account goes down, then suddenly this self will be diminished. And it's like, is that self even there? Like, is it even a real entity, or is it just sort of this illusion? Yeah, what's there for you?
I like that you use the word light of awareness, because it always seems, in my experience, like fear is made out of shadows, in the way that, like you said, if I feel afraid of something, or if I feel agitated by something, or whatever it is that's like a really like friction sort of feeling inside of myself, then it's like it's the strongest whenever I'm not paying attention to it. And that could even be like the not paying attention of, like, as a little kid in a dark room, like turning your back to the corner and feeling like, oh, there's something there. I know it. I know that there's something there. Um, and that just amplifies it over time. And then if you can turn that light of awareness to it and recognize that it's just a wall or whatever it is, just another sensation piece of something, and that the thing that it was latching onto is one of, like we talked about in the last conversation, one of those senses of self that just dissipates whenever you put attention on it. And it's not that sense of being that has its ground and expansion and kind of like fluid solidity to it. Um, it just dissipates as soon as you stop being afraid of the fear.
Yeah, I like that acronym, false expectations appearing real.
Mm.
Um, and I love the analogy of like a child being scared of like the monster under their bed, for example. And it's like that can really create a lot of fear in children. And and the way to overcome that seems to be like to look under the bed and
Mm.
investigate, like, is there an actual monster under there or not? Once you look, it's like, okay, no monster, I don't have to be afraid anymore.
Mm.
But if you don't look, then the mind will create that monster under there, and like you'll run into bed and cover yourself under the covers and be like shaking in fear of this monster. And it's like, it seems to be like our natural inclination to run and hide
Mm.
from these fears rather than to like really look at them. So like, if I'm worried about, scared of like what someone might think of me, I'll probably like avoid them, or like um act a certain way when I'm in their presence. But
Mm.
rarely would I ever ask them like, hey, what's your view of me? And they'll be like, oh, I think you're awesome, or whatever. And it's like, oh, you don't like think I'm super weirdo hippie that's nobody in the world.
Mm.
And um you know usually that's made up, just like the monster under the bed. And like looking at it with someone else, or just with oneself, like looking at the fears, exploring the thoughts that make those up, seem to dissolve the fears. um but I do think it goes against our like natural inclinations to face our fears like head on
Mm.
and really look at them.
So that interests me. You saying that it goes against our natural inclinations to face our fears head on, but we've been discussing that it is our natural or our nature to be in that space behind fear where the joy arises. And that I can see how that could be confusing for a lot of people. Like, wait, so you're saying that I have to go against my natural inclinations in order to get to my natural state of being? What does that mean?
Yes, you must go against your nature to get to your nature. um no, that's a good point. And I think there's like there's the natural space, or nature, meaning like the sort of essence, like
Hmm.
um so like the nature of ourselves, the essence of ourselves, to me is speaks to that joy that we're talking about. And then like I use natural tendencies like almost as like our evolutionary compulsive
Hmm.
like tendencies. So like to eat, like my natural compulsions are like to go and eat that Snickers bar and eat all those potato chips and like um just stay under the covers in the morning and hit snooze on the alarm clock and um like have as much sex as possible.
Hmm.
um so that's kind of what I'm speaking to when I'm saying like our natural tendency might be to run away from fear or to feel safe, to do whatever makes us the most secure or indulges our like um, pleasure sensors. um, but it's kind of distinct from like the natural state of who we are.
Hmm.
I want to circle back to that. Well, actually, I want to know, like, in your everyday life, either now or in the past, about like your fears, like your
Hmm.
actual fears and the process of looking at them and like what that's been like for you.
Hmm. Um, so recently, I actually had a moment the other day, in the shower, actually, where I was thinking for a second, and it's like I feel like there's still some seeds of fear inside of me where that have the capability to manifest themselves or grow into a little tree and obscure my essential state of being in a given moment. And so I thought about it. It's like, what am I most afraid of? And I sat and felt into that for a second because I have done a lot of practice things with getting used to the idea and kind of the experience of death and all of those things. But the two things that came to mind at first were drowning and burning. Um, just because I really highly value breath. I really like breathing. Um, and the idea of being underwater and not being able to take a breath of air is like I've never had that experience before. Um, but that to me just feels like a very uncomfortable sensation. Same thing with like being caught in a burning building or something like that. Or uh, I guess a more intense example and what came to my mind was the I believe Vietnamese monk that has that famous picture of self-immolating in the street in protest of the violence that was happening at the time. And the thought came to my mind of like at some point in time, and this was the facing of the fear because I felt into both of those things and try to like walk myself mentally through the process of drowning and the process of burning. And the thought came to mind that at some point in time, and this may not happen, but it is very possible that every piece of my body will be in excruciating pain, and there will be nothing that I can do to change that. It at that point in time would just be like, this is the moment that's here. This is what we're working with. And having that feeling as well as the gratitude that that moment is not right now um, significantly reduced the amount of kind of latent underlying fear that I had towards that I hadn't really paid attention to because I hadn't sat and tried to dig into like what is it that I actually feel most afraid of. And then for me always like walking my brain through the most intense manifestation of that fear that I can possibly imagine and being able to just sit with that and like, okay, if that happens, then like at that point, same as anything else. If I'm in a situation where there's something happening and I can't get out of the situation, and then like there's not a single point in making up that mental thing of like, oh man, this sucks. And like I understand that if you're burning alive, then that may not be super enjoyable. But at that point in time, it's just like a this is what we're working with. This is what we're here with now. This is another sensation, very intense sensation, but it's just another sensation. And being able to walk my brain through that seems to not only dissipate the fear, but bring about a really strong sense of peacefulness inside of my body.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really could be a really powerful experiment for people to try, of just like first asking the question, like, what am I really scared of here?
Mm.
And then, like, let's say it's burning alive. Okay, like, let's look at that. Let's explore that. What would it really be like for my body to be on fire? And I kind of get that. Like, yeah, it would suck. It would be very painful and intense pain beyond imaginable. And that's it. Like,
Yeah.
there would just be a lot of pain happening here, and that would be the experience. Um, and I think, there's more, like, I don't think, I mean, I doubt that you go like your day-to-day life, you're like worrying about spontaneous combustion.
Actually, that's haunted me every day for my entire life. I'm
Um,
constantly consumed with the thought of spontaneous combustion.
so, but like on a everyday, like just day to day,
Mm.
going through your days, what, if any, fears like crop up in your space, or
Mm.
are there any fears?
Um, I don't at this point in time, I don't feel like I experience a lot of fear on a day-to-day basis. Um, Specifically because I have made this pact with myself to like consciously live only in ways that I am 100% okay with, regardless of what happens as a result. So that has made it to where like if I in my heart am at peace with whatever it is that I'm doing, regardless of what it is, whether it's like a some form of service to the community or people that I know, um, or just a personal activity like going climbing or getting in a cold water or whatever, um, that takes away what I see is the most common fear for a lot of people's day to day is just the fear of social appearance or the fear of being seen as XYZ, being seen as a weird hippie, whatever. Um, and I used to definitely have some Okay. I used to definitely have some fears about social expectation or social appearance. Um, and then when I was in college at LSU, I decided to no longer entertain those kind of fears. And so I spent a couple of years um, with like everything that I could possibly think of that could have made me uncomfortable in like a public setting. I just made a effort to do those things all day, every day. And so facing my fears in that way seems to have just like dissipated them almost entirely.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very, perhaps the most common fear, like, what do people think of me?
Mm,
And I still experience that. I think it's still there, like in the background sometimes. And when I look at it, it dissolves, but then it like creeps back
mm,
in. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of people. Like, you know, what is my family going to think of me if I do this?
mm,
Or, you know, maybe I don't know, yeah, just like what do people think of me? Does this person like me? Do they not like me? Do they think I'm weird? Um, so you noticed that there was some of that in you at some point in high school slash college, and you decided like I'm gonna face this head on. And I would love to hear like about what that looked like.
so what that looked like for me was like every day strapping a speaker to my backpack and just blaring music, dancing around campus, going and doing like handstands and stuff in the quad and some 3-inch inseam shorts and no shoes, no shirt. Uh, and pretty much just running around, climbing trees, doing literally anything that I could think of that could possibly make me feel self-conscious about being weird or any of those things, and just doing them literally 6 to 8 hours a day, every single day. Um, and a byproduct of that was that I realized that, like, wow, this is so much fun. I really enjoy doing all of these things. And so it became less of an issue of like, I wonder if people think I'm weird, to like, I'm having a great time. This, these are the things that I genuinely enjoy doing. So why would I care what anyone else thought about them? If somebody else doesn't enjoy these things, that's fine. But I do, so I'm just gonna do them.
So so that, I mean, that's so interesting. So this started as like, running around shirtless, blaring music, barefoot, jumping around, dancing in the middle of like a very public area, started as like an experiment with yourself of like, okay, a part of me is scared of what people think of me. I'm going to go do the most outrageous things and like face that fear head on.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, like the first time you did it, like the first time, talk me through like the first time you were like, all right, taking off my shirt, strapping this speaker to my backpack, and like going, getting on the bus or however you got to campus. Like, what was that like?
Um, that it was So being in Louisiana made it easier because it was obscenely hot outside almost all the time. So it genuinely did just feel better to have less clothes on. Um, but the experience of doing it at first was interesting because the amount of attention that was immediately like pulled in. Um, so, which is interesting given the context, because it's like, if so I have this kind of weird fear inside of myself about what people think about me or whatever. And so, like, not only am I going to do some weird things, or like some things that could be perceived as weird, as a way to help myself feel more comfortable, but in the process it's also going to actually make the thing that I was afraid of happen on a much larger scale. Where I had people like every day sending me videos that somebody that I didn't know had sent to them of like, look at this crazy ass dude. Just jumped out of a tree and ran down the street. Um, and so the initial feeling was like, huh! Like, I don't know what to do with this many people, like not even talking to me about it, but just looking at me, kind of taking videos or pictures or whatever it was. Got the police called on me a couple of times, all of those kind of things. And it was just like,
Did the police show up?
yeah, yeah.
What was that like?
So I knew most of the police around campus just because I would go and talk to them, or they would ask me what I was doing and I would tell them, and they were like, all right, have a good day. But there were a couple of times in the student union that I used to go and blare music, and I'd go dance with all the employees on Fridays, all the people who were serving food or whatever, or anybody who was out sitting doing homework. I would just take people and dance with them for a second and then dip out. And the manager got really angry one day, and I I was a little sassy to him of just like, if you don't want to have a good time, that's fine, but you're not going to stop me. Um, and he told me he was going to call the police. It's like, okay, I'll wait here. And I stood there, and I got there, and they were like, oh, he's calling about you? It's like, yeah. They're like, just get out of here. You're fine. I was like, cool. Thank you. Um, but in that way, it was like the full spectrum of public opinion, from like one person or a couple of people over time who either thought I didn't have pants on walking into a building or whatever, calling the police, thinking that I was weird enough that I was a threat to their security, or people who just like really enjoyed the energy and enthusiasm that came with all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, like, a part of me wants to try that, like just go, either shirtless or in some like really out there like decor, and like go just dance around public places and face that fear head on.
Mm.
But it does, like, I can feel some resistance, like some fear to that,
Mm.
which is maybe more reason to do it. But then, like, I don't want to go be crazy in front of people. Like, that's scary.
Mm.
Uh, so that's interesting. And so you said, like, initially there was like I mean, I feel that, like, I feel that myself, like, oh my God, that's absurd. Like, especially like, friends hearing from random people, like pictures and videos of like this crazy dude. My friends are like, haha, look what so and so sent to me
Mm.
of you. And like, I can feel that resistance. So how did you move through that? Or what was that process like?
I don't know if I really noticed a whole lot of moving through it until a specific moment that it kind of clicked, where it's like, oh, that didn't make me uncomfortable. And so, like, I must be fine with this now. Um, where there was a football game going on, and I didn't go to the game, but I went out to just hang out with friends and tailgate for the day. And there were like 100,000 people on campus. And I was in the middle of the parade grounds where a lot of people were congregated. And
Probably
one more time.
I may very well may have been there that day.
And one of my friends just ran up behind me. I didn't see her at any point in time, tackled me. And then we started like crawling around and barking at each other like monkeys for a minute, and just like wrestling in the middle of the parade grounds. And when that had stopped, I got up and went back to my group of friends, and a couple of them were like, you do a lot of weird shit, but this is the only time that I've ever been embarrassed to be around you.
Huh.
And like, I didn't feel at all bothered by it. So it's like, wow, I guess this worked.
And how long after your initial experiment was that?
It was probably 2 months, 2 months after the initial.
So it takes about, at least for you, about 2 months of like running around like a crazy man and really feeling through, like, you know, being okay with whatever people's perceptions are of you, and like intentionally doing things that people will probably perceive and like, what is that guy doing? And then eventually you got to a point of like, there's literally no concern anymore inside of
Mm,
myself for the perception of others. And I can see how liberating that must be.
most certainly. And if you or anyone else out there is interested in that kind of confrontation with themselves, um, I mean, I can highly recommend just running around like a crazy person for 2 months. But a little bit more subtle way to go about that would be just to make eye contact with as many people as possible, which
Mm,
I know that that's difficult right now with the way that like some things are re-shutting down and all of that. But that's a really good exercise just to get really comfortable with yourself. Because eye contact is super intimate, um, and can generate some crazy weird feelings with strangers.
sure. Yeah. I imagine most strangers probably won't hold much eye contact with most people though, but every once in a while I bet you get someone who's just like, um yeah, well, I mean, let's bring this to a close.
Okay.
um um I mean, I've really enjoyed hearing about that experience because I've never heard like your perspective on that, but I
Mm.
before I knew you, I'm like, I know I saw you several times like dancing in the quad, and I don't remember exactly what my thoughts or perceptions were, but I was definitely like, what is going on over there? Like, what are you doing? Um, so yeah, I learned a lot about your experience in this conversation. Um, but yeah, how do you want to bring this to a close?
um, I guess we talked about fear, talked about privilege, we talked about why anybody should possibly be interested in exploring themselves or these conversations. And I I am super interested. I really appreciate all of the feedback that we got this past week, and I would love to kind of close this out with saying like I know you as well am super interested and grateful for any other feedback that anyone would have to give. And if you've got any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, howls of outrage, any of those things, just drop them in a comment, and I look forward to seeing that and addressing it at some point in the future. Do you have anything to add?
Just to echo that, I really enjoy the conversation with you. And uh, you know, we're both here for the listeners, for just people in general, human beings, other human beings who are curious about who they are, and you know, why they might be feeling a certain way, and maybe have a sense of like, there's there's more out there. Like, I just know it, I just don't know exactly what it is or how to get there.
Mm.
um yeah, you know, whether you have a question or comment or just are interested in something we said, please don't hesitate to reach out in any way that you know to reach us. Obviously, the comments, like, we'll take a look at that. But also just thank you to anyone who has made it this far in our conversation. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day.
I love you.
Love you too. Gage and everyone else out there.